So historians do have a wish list. That is a criteria that they would like to see in order to determine what did and did not happen in history. They want multiple sources. The more the merrier.
Yes, I agree. Multiple sources are good, but there's one important word that's missing there. And I think that it's later on in your list, but it really should just be one criteria, not two separate ones. So the actual criteria should be multiple independent sources. Because just saying multiple sources, I mean, you would have to say, oh, the Bible has multiple sources. In the fact that there are multiple copies of it, that could be multiple sources right there. Multiple, different copies of it even. So using the whole multiple sources thing doesn't exactly encapsulate what historians are looking for as far as a wish list of criteria. What they're looking for are multiple independent sources, multiple independent accounts. That word independent is very important when you're talking about sources, especially when it's concerning the Bible. But the criteria of multiple independent sources ensures that we have multiple people that are independently attesting to some event or person actually existing. Multiple independent accounts would allow us to corroborate or to triangulate this person or event in history. We can, figure out where the differences are, which account is more reliable, and all these other things. So multiple independent accounts is what we're looking for here, not just multiple accounts in general. The big problem with just saying multiple accounts in this situation is that you can have multiple accounts, but let's say you have 3 accounts here. You've got one account that is the source account, and then the 2 other accounts are going to copy off of that one account, or they copy off of each other, or both. In that particular situation, you don't have multiple sources corroborating some event or person as existing or happening in history. What you have is one source saying that this thing happened or this person existed, and then other people copying that. And so you don't have multiple accounts there, you just have one. This is going to be very important later.
Remember that the New Testament is not one single book. It is several books that were compiled together much later. So do you have multiple sources? Yes. We have a very abnormal amount of sources for someone who lived 2,000 years ago.
See, this is what I'm saying about having an issue when it comes to evaluating these points of criteria against the historical Jesus, because right off the bat here, we have him saying that we have an abnormal amount of sources for Jesus' existence. But if you carefully consider the sources that we do have, you'll find that it's not really abundant, nor is it abnormal. And remember, the criteria that I'm using here is actually a combination of 2 of his criteria, multiple independent sources. So we'll cover it a little bit more here in a second when he gets to the independent sources, but for the multiple independent accounts, we don't have that. We have one account. That would be Paul's account. Paul is the only independent source that we have about Jesus existing at all or appearing to people at all. That's the only account that we have. And I'll explain this here in a little bit, like the background information on this to prove it. But basically, the Synoptic Gospels, they knew Paul's work. Mark definitely knew what Paul was saying, what he was laying down, the theology that he was teaching, and also Paul's personal opinions on things. So that means that the Gospel of Mark at least used Paul's work in some kind of sense in order to inform himself on what Jesus might have said or did. And so considering that and the fact that Matthew and Luke both copy off of Mark, with Luke copying off of Matthew too, that means that the 3 synoptic gospels are not independent accounts at all. They're all based on Paul, which resolves us to one independent account. And then John is definitely not independent of the synoptics, and we'll get into that here in a little bit, like I said, but the Gospel of John definitely uses the synoptics in order to inform his redactions of those Gospels. So everybody knew Paul's work. Paul was a rock star in the early Christian community. His stuff circulated all throughout the Christian community. So there's no way that they can't be tainted. What we're looking for with multiple independent accounts here would be independent accounts that were written at the same time as Paul was writing or prior to that. But we don't have anybody writing at that time. The closest that we have really is the Hebrews, but that was written by somebody. We don't know who, but it definitely wasn't Paul. So, but they were writing at about the same time as Paul was writing, and not even that book really relates that Jesus physically existed on earth. It has a lot of different connotations in it that imply that Jesus had a God-created or a divinely created body that he inhabited. So, really, we're just stuck with Paul. Paul is the only source that we have, because that's the only independent source that we have. If the other sources are derived off of Paul, then there's no way that we can count those as multiple independent sources. You could count them as multiple sources, but they all resolve to just one account. So I would change my evaluation from a blue check mark to a big red X here, because it obviously doesn't satisfy this. We have one account that's independent of other Christian writings at the time, but not independent of Christian thought. So